We have been joined by MOAYYED JAFRY, senior journalist also. Now, MOAYYED, welcome to Indus News. Now, as reports are coming that Taliban fighters have entered Kabul, arguing that they were doing so because Afghan government security forces had abandoned their posts in parts of the city.
Yes, basically what we're looking at is a strategy by Taliban under the current circumstances, where they are not looking to engage in a conflict when it comes to Kabul, because they have very clearly laid it out right from the word go that they're not interested and they will not be taking Kabul by force. Now, surrendering if a particular force in Afghanistan, the Afghan Defense Forces, if they surrender or if they give up their post, that does not equate to taking a particular post by force. Now, this all, I'd like to add to this, that this particular strategy is a strategy of a Taliban which the world is getting to know now. For those who see this particular victory of the Taliban or the takeover, whatever the West might want to call it, as similar or even the same as the one in the past and during the Soviet era, are clearly mistaken, because we now see a Taliban which are not just militarily more organized, but they are politically very aware. They care about global legitimacy. They have been engaging in dialogue, not just only with the US and with the Kabul government when it comes to intra-Afghan talks, but also with other global powers. If you've been following Zabiullah Mujahid or Sohail Shaheen or other people who represent the group, they've been regularly meeting with representatives from the European Union. They've been regularly meeting with representatives from the Central Asian countries, so on and so forth. So the Taliban will not be doing anything right now, from what we have seen, that would jeopardize their legitimacy when it comes to international recognition. So this particular move also signifies the fact that they would move forward if there is no resistance. But when it comes to conflict, they will not do anything, as it appears, that will create a problem where it appears that they're taking Kabul by force.
Right, Jafri, it's clear that Taliban is not taking Kabul by force. And also in the past week, we haven't seen Taliban not taking anything by force, rather it's just coming into their laps. Now, you've talked about international recognition. Let's talk about international recognition. Obviously, as the Taliban are set to come in power, maybe tonight, the day after, or a week later, but eventually they are to set foot in the presidential palace as the government of Afghanistan. How do you see how important is international recognition for the Taliban? Obviously, Britain has already said this a few weeks back that they are ready to work with the Taliban government. And also today there is an emergency Security Council meeting going on, which Russia has convened on the emergency situation in Afghanistan. How do you think, how is the international community going to react to the new Taliban government?
I think there's one thing that needs to be understood very clearly right now. There's a lot of fog when it comes to the situation. Everybody's focused on how Kabul will be taken. The major sticking point in all of these negotiations was the form of government in Afghanistan, where the Taliban were adamant on the fact that they would want to establish an Islamic emirate, whereas the West, as we all know, are very democracy savvy, no matter how blatantly it has failed in many countries and there's chaos. But obviously that's the popular global narrative, that there should be a democratic government in Afghanistan instead of an Islamic emirate. So it remains to be seen now if the Taliban would at all compromise on that particular narrative of an Islamic emirate and go for something which would be more conveniently acceptable to the civilized world or to the international community. Once that is decided, that will be point number one. That will be step number one when it comes to global legitimacy. Secondly,
just to add this, I beg your pardon, I beg you, I just have to add something in this on the first point that you made about the Islamic Emirate. When there were meetings going on in Doha, the Taliban made this very clear to the US administration that we are going to implement Islamic Sharia law in Afghanistan. So I don't think that they might be considering any sort of a bit leverage on that demand, don't you think?
I agree with you, and that has been their stance ever since, which has created problems for them when it came to the bargaining chip or to strike a particular deal, if you want to say that, with the US and with the Afghan government. But like we've always seen, that when it comes to negotiation, you start from an extreme position and you may hold a little bit of leverage which only you would know. So knowing the Taliban, knowing how they've been building this narrative, and looking at the way the people in Afghanistan, now we need to understand that the pace of these Taliban victories signifies something completely different. The pace at which they have conquered these provinces, provincial capitals, indicates that there was not significant civilian resistance, which means that these are not just military victories. These could be political victories as well. They maybe enjoyed local support. Now, I'd like to take you back a little bit to the reason why people were not supporting the Afghan defense forces in this situation. The reason being, if you see the reports of Syead and Unama, the level of corruption that was basically proven on the Ghani government, and the way the billions and billions of dollars, almost $2 trillion flowing into Afghanistan, never made it to the people. Afghan military, every year, this is on the books, this is on the record, 1/3 of the Afghan army left every year. So basically, all these factors, they bundled up, which led to resentment against the Ghani government and inadvertently a kind of a tacit support for anyone else, which is why these victories by the Taliban could be seen as political victories as well. Now, getting back to the point, once they have created this scenario where they are now in a situation where they can bargain, they will need to understand that although their narrative, of course, resonated with some level of the population in Afghanistan, for them to be globally legitimate, for them to get help from the international community to rebuild Afghanistan from the war-torn situation it is in right now. So they would need global legitimacy. And for that, they might need to alter, you could say tweak their system a little bit. We don't know as yet if they'd be willing to do so. And if they won't be willing to do so, what it would do in the end. There's another very important point, which is that the responsibility on the Taliban regarding their claim that there will be no attacks on any other country from Afghan soil. Now, we all know that the Afghan defense forces, the Ghani administration, and everybody who supports them, which are not a lot, but they still exist, would be making sure, or the spoilers who would not want this to go through and would want this situation to go absolutely south for this Taliban, would create those situations where other countries might feel threatened. So the Taliban's responsibility, the Taliban's legitimacy does not just end with forming a government. It would need to be carried forward with responsibility and to ensure that the land and the soil of Afghanistan would not be used for attacks or terrorism abroad. And there can never be and if there is anything like that, they would take care of it and deal with it and punish those unequivocally. So these two things would eventually lead to an establishment of legitimacy for the Taliban government in Afghanistan.
Right, MOAYYED, just the last question that I'm going to throw at you is that, do you think there is an imminent future threat of a fifth-generation war that Afghanistan might face in the future?
I'd say I'd like to point that out. We're already in a fifth-generation war in Afghanistan. Whatever is happening in, if you're referring to the fifth-generation war, are we talking about the cyber space war?
We're not talking about the space war. We're talking about the misinformation war, the social media war, the information war.
Exactly. Cyberspace war. So basically, that's already on board. We're all seeing it. We saw the vicious campaign against Pakistan. We saw the vicious campaign against the Taliban, even how they're savages and how they are cutting throats. So basically, they were trying to portray to the global community, because that's all what the Ghani government had. The only thing they had to throw in the face of the international community to hide their own incompetence, to hide the fact that they had ghost soldiers, to hide the fact that they had corrupted billions of dollars, was to create this straw man, this monster Taliban version, and on the sidelines, blame Pakistan for creating the situation, because they had no other way of legitimizing their own existence. which they had completely failed the mission of rebuilding in Afghanistan, of creating an inclusive government where people felt safe, where people felt they could get justice, and where people felt they were taken care of when it comes to welfare. So this fifth generation warfare is going to get even more intense. We saw the entire campaign of hashtag Sanction Pakistan, majority of which, and I'm not surprised, came from accounts from India and news outlets from Israel, from a particular faction in Afghanistan. I've mentioned this before. The Pakistan Army has mentioned this before. We know the orchestrator of this entire campaign. That plus the demonization of the Taliban, plus the legitimization of those who are originally spoilers in Afghanistan vis-a-vis India, those who have no apparent stake in Afghanistan, but could only play in the hands or play some role for those who want to destabilize the region. So this fifth generation
quick comment from you, MOAYYED. You mentioned India. A very quick comment from you. How is India feeling right now?
Oh, not so well, for many reasons. The first of which was that obviously New Delhi was all hunky-dory and very happy about the fact that they had an ally on Pakistan's western borders, and they could maybe pressure Pakistan into a situation where Pakistan was up against two hostile borders at the same time. The Ghani government basically played in that hands. And now, to balance that out, they invested billions of rupees in Afghanistan as a compensation for their miscreant activities, which they planned in the future. But now that the horse that they bet on is gone, he's already fled the country, New Delhi will need to rethink its policies, to be very honest. New Delhi would need to understand that there is a way to coexist peacefully in this region. They will need to find that way instead of always, because if you look at India right now, it is not at peace with any of its neighbors. It is being accused of expansionism by virtually not just every other neighbor that it has, including China, including others, including Pakistan. But there's 1/3 of India right now is under insurgency. There are states fighting. There have been deaths in between Assam and the other state right next to it, Mizoram, 8 deaths in there over territorial issues. So basically, this is the mood Prime Minister Narendra Modi has created, this hostile environment, which now is spilling over into his own country and is already creating problems and for stability and security of the entire region. So New Delhi will need to now rethink its policies. It will need to figure out a way to mend ties, not just with Pakistan, but with other partners, with other bordering countries as well, because their strategy in Afghanistan to unsettle Pakistan and destabilize the region at the behest of somebody else or for their own good has failed miserably.
Well, I'm sure India must be watching the situation very keenly and enjoying some fantastic tea. Now, MOAYYED Jafry, senior journalist, thank you very much for joining us on Indus News.